everyone. You are listening to another episode of the Colleague Down the Hall podcast. I'm your host, Jeanene Wolfe, and today I'm joined by Darlene Sousa. Darlene is a testing psychologist and former counselor. She saw and experienced for herself as a neurodivergent person in a new culture how systems of support did not connect, with each having different requirements for entry, leaving families lost. And I so relate to that. Today, we're talking about promoting access and culturally responsive care through quality professional development in areas often protected by the old guard. Welcome, Darlene. It's so nice to have you here today.
Thanks so much. I'm happy to be here with you.
Great. Okay. So as you shared with me, many clinicians are unable to return to graduate school, which we understand with student loans and stuff. And they would want to do that maybe to further their education so that they could provide things like assessments and stuff that typically have been provided only by psychologists in the past. And with today's technology, that shouldn't be the only avenue to being able to provide assessments. So your mission is to promote greater access to progressive services for the community through the promotion of practical trainings for clinicians, all within the neurodiversity, cultural, and gender-affirming network. So can you start us off by providing more information about what these challenges are that caused you to begin offering trainings around this?
Sure thing. So I heard from a number of individuals, non-clinician individuals, clients, patients, in different environments in which I worked, where there was a pattern. There was this general resonance that they were coming to me because they were advised by someone else that perhaps this time, the second, third, even fourth, fifth time, they might have a better experience. So after hearing this for a while, I started to ask more questions. And overall, what I saw through documentation as a testing psychologist, when I review other reports, as well as just the stories that individuals shared, was the process was invalidating. So I came up with this term that it was a very old guard, white coat, top-down approach. Evaluation was being done to people. It was not a collaborative process. Of course, going to an evaluation, we might have an idea of what we think we might have as a diagnosis or what direction. And of course, there's a lot to be said around social media, TikTok, information that's shared there. But if someone's coming to you in distress, it shouldn't be a yes or no binary process. Someone might come in thinking they have something, and they might find out through evaluation that they don't have that particular diagnosis, but it's something else. Or even if an individual does not have a diagnosis, let's say it's a poor fit of work environment or academic environment, or the symptoms are at a subclinical level, we don't just send them out the door, having invested those resources and that amount of time with us, to not give them some information, resources, and help. And so I started to hear a lot of stories of that. And as a 2E individual and mother to a daughter who's now in her 30s, that I had to bang on a lot of doors for, it's very hard to find that level of service. Meanwhile, I know from different clinics that I've worked at, and I've heard from others, they were waiting months, some up to a year. And I had parents tell me, we place so much hope in XYZ University Medical Center that they could do an evaluation and tell us what's going on with our child or an adult if they were being evaluated. We waited 6 months, we waited 8 months, a year, and the clinician spent 30 minutes with us at most and sent us on our way. Even when people do get an answer, the experience isn't what they needed. There wasn't a therapeutic element to it. It was more like info dropping. Okay? So that left them puzzled. What does this mean exactly? What does this mean for my future, my child's future? What are the options for treatment? You gave me 3 pages of recommendations, or you gave me only 3 recommendations. How do I prioritize this? So there's a peeling away of layers that needs to happen when you do get the answer. And for some folks, a 30-minute appointment and then a memo at the end of that comes to you via email is just not sufficient. And so as I began to chat with other colleagues, including testing psychologists, it seemed that as well, testing psychologists were coming to me asking, can you show me how you do that kind of evaluation, or what tools would you use? So I saw that it was across the board. We had therapists, LCSWs, a whole range of folks, nurse practitioners, and psychologists who were wanting to help learn more, do better. And so a group of us, it started off small, but it's grown. A group of us who were all neurodivergent got together and said, let's see if we can teach assessment in a way that We can really coach people, provide access on a weekly basis for feedback, get more people in the field doing it to help with these waiting lists, and improve the quality to get rid of this whole binary evaluation process, the yes or no. So we first established our comprehensive 6-month program, which includes a private Facebook group membership for the duration of your clinicianship and live weekly group coaching, which is so invaluable. If we think about our hourly rate and you have the opportunity to join for 2 sessions a week for 6 months, that's huge. And so we provided that. But we also began to hear from other people. And we have a data scientist on staff too, who said there are people who want to do this. They can't commit to that or they don't have the resources. And so we have several other offerings now and are planning on offering more in the way of assessment and therapies that meet a need in the coming year.
Yeah, that's wonderful. So I want to touch on 2 things that you mentioned. First of all, 2E. A lot of people may not know what that is. So basically 2E is a person who has some type of disability, like a learning disability, ADHD, autism, and they're also gifted. And so if you don't understand 2E, you don't get the complicated nature of that type of profile because then this goes back to the other thing I was thinking as you were talking is that we still have so many people who have such old school ideas about ADHD and autism. And that is a huge problem. Like you were discussing, I've had clients come back and say, well, yeah, they said if I have a college degree, there's no way I'm ADHD. And you just want to like pound your fist and scream and say, what is wrong with that person? But there's still lots and lots of people out there doing assessments that have that perspective.
Regrettably, yes. People are told that often that that's impossible. You couldn't go to school, or you couldn't get this level of grade, that you wouldn't be college bound, that you wouldn't be able to not be impulsive or interested in literature or math class when you're in middle school. And also around being 2E, twice exceptional, not understanding that giftedness is, I don't like this term particularly, special need, but giftedness is actually a special need. There's a whole other set of social emotional needs that gifted children and adults need. There's a particular type of depressive symptom that reappears from time to time, as well as other conditions that really a therapist or psychologist needs to be aware of for both assessment and therapy. And so it's complex and we're missing, I'm an English language learner myself. We have people falling through the cracks. We have people who are mislabeled, underidentified, misidentified, women in particular, individuals of color who are not getting the diagnosis they need. And it's one of the growing groups right now is women. And it isn't until they hit perimenopause where they start to go like, wow, things were a struggle for me, but perimenopause hit and now I'm at a complete loss. What is this? Am I losing my mind? Am I becoming psychotic? They really don't know. If you don't know, you don't know. You're a layperson and you come to find out that they just didn't have a diagnosis or they're mislabeled, usually with a personality disorder or some kind of mood instability. And it wasn't until that point that they sought help and someone properly trained in evaluation was able to really identify what was going on.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I feel you with the menopause thing. I'm 58, and so I am almost through menopause, I think. And yeah, it's like you just feel like I thought I knew myself, and now everything seems out of control, and I don't even know how did I get this far because today I can't even accomplish 3 things on a task list.
Yeah. And so a lot of people you'll hear, I'm sure you have, that I think I'm going nuts, whatever that means.
Yeah.
I'm nuts now, and something's happening to me. Not even thinking the possibility that it might be neurodevelopmental.
Yeah, right. Okay. So you mentioned the old guard, and I see that all the time in therapist online spaces. You are teaching psychologists as well as master's levels clinicians to provide these assessments and do it in a way that is accessible and supportive. And what I've seen is master's levels clinicians coming up to, present in some sort of online space that, hey, I'm doing this or I'm interested in this. And the psychologists get way freaked out about it. I spent years and years learning to do this and you're not qualified. And I think that we know that the world is changing and I think there's so many more neurodivergent people in the world than anyone ever knew. People say it's overdiagnosed. I think it's underdiagnosed, in fact. And so they get all worked up, losing sight of the fact that with training, other people can do this with technology. and that we're not competing with them. We're trying to increase the ability for people to access this service.
Absolutely. We hear about waiting lists, as I mentioned. And if we know that there's waiting lists out there, why wouldn't we want to ensure that people are, one, able to get the care that they need sooner, and two, ensure that they're receiving quality care? And I think the themes that I hear around that pushback from my fellow testing psychologists is, one, this is a lot of money that it takes to go to school all these years. And it's an investment of mental resources, financial resources to learn this. And oftentimes it's through those hoops that we get this education to be able to do assessment. But really, quite honestly, leaving your psychology program isn't going to leave you in a position to start off with doing assessment. Quite often you need additional training. That's just how it is. There are also a number, it shouldn't be this way, but there are a number of universities that offer doctoral programs in psychology that are more focused on counseling, less so on assessment. So there are those factors. And I think with, again, the commitment that people make and the investment in time, a sacrifice of time, family, or financial resources, there's that gatekeeping that this is something that can potentially be lucrative. Depending on where you live, assessments can run anywhere from $1,200 all the way up to $7,000 or more. And I heard of clinicians on the East Coast that charge over $10,000. Once you get a reputation and experience, you can charge more. And so I think that's where some of that gatekeeping comes from. Kind of like, I'm doing this, so I'm going to close the door behind me. And I do agree with some of the doubters. Every once in a while on social media, there will be pushback. How can you do this in a workshop? How can you do this? So they don't fully understand the programs we offer. And unfortunately, those individuals don't reach out to ask to learn more. They just make grand assumptions. And the thing that they're concerned about, how could someone possibly learn to do this in XYZ short amount of time, is actually what we got together at Mindful U to change, is that there are a lot of people doing insufficient evaluations out there. There are people who do not offer a differential diagnosis. Again, they offer that binary yes or no. There are folks who offer one assessment and call it an evaluation, and one assessment is just one assessment. There are people not doing a great job out there. So we actually are on the same side as those testing psychologists, and unfortunately, they don't understand that. That we agree that there's a lot that goes into understanding psychometrics, the foundational information you need to be able to select assessments, know which to use, understanding the norming and test selection process, all of that. And our programs provide that. I'd love for them to investigate to see that it does provide all of that, but it provides it in a friendly, accessible way. We here have special education folks on staff, instructional designers. And so we actually, I feel, and the feedback that we get from the individuals and clinicians who've taken our programs is it's a lot of information and a lot of content, but with the support, you get through it and it makes sense. And I think that can be hard for some testing psychologists to actually understand that we don't want people doing credit evaluations. That's actually part of our mission. And so the program is really in-depth and thorough, and it requires a serious commitment from those who enroll. We're not passing people through on a workshop. They actually have pre and post workshop learning and commitments and requirements that they're expected to complete and submit. And so it's really thorough. And at the end, it's addressing that greater question or issue that we need to do a better job overall as a field.
Right. Okay. And it always boggles my mind that curiosity is like the first thing that comes to mind when I'm working with a client. And when therapists go into something with a set opinion about something they really don't know about, it's like, where's your curiosity? Where are your therapy skills? Where you're open-minded to hearing about other things, and and then taking the time to be a critical thinker and learn more and make a decision based off of all of that.
Exactly. It's so awesome that you mentioned that, because that inquisitiveness is actually one of the top skills or temperamental needs that you have as a skilled evaluator. It's an investigation. We're going to find out what this clue says. Oh, that clue said that. Let's go down this path. It's like a complex game of clue. And so if you are naturally that way, you're going to be a great evaluator.
Yeah, absolutely. I find more and more the online spaces are great in that I've met therapists, clinicians from all around the world and get exposure to lots of those different things. Sometimes I do hear, and so I run consultation groups. And one of the things that I always say up front is we have to remember that we all have different license types and we all have different requirements for our license in our particular state. And so that muddies the water sometimes for people. But
Yeah.
I will hear someone say, like, in my state, we are not allowed to diagnose ADHD or diagnose autism as master level clinicians. Is that something that, I don't know if this is in your wheelhouse, but are you aware if there are states that are doing that, setting those restrictions?
So I think there's a huge amount of misunderstanding.
Okay.
So, and this is probably, I would say, when we have folks just send in an inquiry form, this is probably about 50% of the inquiries. And we now have more information online to help people understand. But the first question people should pause and ask themselves is, in my state or in my jurisdiction, because we are now international, am I allowed to diagnose and assess? It's kind of like a decision tree, yes or no. And so that's the first thing. If there is some kind of limitation, a few states that I know of have that limitation for autism, but not for ADHD. So the misunderstanding comes from a couple of things. Is, can you diagnose, yes or no? Now, we can't keep up on all of the jurisdictions, especially being international now. So we always say you need to check. But as far as we know, and we have a form that we share with people that's created by another forensic assessment group that does investigation into this, Nevada is the only state in the US that has a limitation, as far as we know, based on this other organization's research. After that, there might be some states who have limitations on autism, but not ADHD. But really what it comes down to when you read the regs across the state from master's level is that you cannot do projectives, so like the Rorschach, or neuropsych test, which you're not going to be doing in this program. And it's completely unnecessary for the assessment of ADHD and autism. So those are the considerations. It's the publishers, and this is another area where even testing psychologists get confused. So in addition to that, it's the publishers that put limitations on who can purchase and use their instruments. So there's a kind of a grading system, A, B, C, so on. And so for the majority of instruments that are out there, about 85% of assessment tools, a master's level with additional training is sufficient. Those extra assessments beyond that aren't anything that someone would need to use, either in our program or in this realm of neurodevelopment. And we have individuals who are sometimes, I think, a shock to the testing psychologist community who are wanting to engage in this, and that's nurse practitioners. Most of those are at the master's level, but they are authorized to purchase and access and use any instrument that they want. So it can be a little confusing until you know that. You check your state and can you diagnose and assess, yes or no? And then the parameters of the publishers, which we covered in the courses.
Yeah, it's all of these things. When you're talking to people from different states, different countries, there is a lot of variability. So it's always best for everyone to check their own stuff out. It sounds like you do a great job guiding people on what to look for and how to do that. So that's really cool.
If I can add one more thing, if you don't mind, I think something else that confuses folks too is they'll say, I did an evaluation, but clearly I can't do it. I did an evaluation on a kid or a teenager, and the school wouldn't accept it. So I used to be a school psychologist a long time ago and a school administrator. The school will be that way with anybody, even a testing psychologist. It's schools do not have to accept private evaluations. They just have to consider them. That's it. And so that's another point where I think people get confused.
Okay. So then it's also educating people, the clients we're working with about, okay, this might be a common response from a school, and these are the questions you might ask, or this might be the information you provide to them so that they can maybe be a little more open-minded. And as a child of multi-generations of teachers, and you being a teacher, we know that funds are limited and there's only so much that can go around. So the more children you have diagnosed with different things, the more spread thin the services become. So I do somewhat understand their perspective, but at the same time, a child who needs help is a child who needs help.
Right. And so in our 6-month program, we actually differentiate. It's a talk that I used to give, the ed versus med model. And so educational eligibility is about that, eligibility to a narrowly funded program for the lower 5 to 8% of kids. Whereas the medical model is you meet criteria, you get the diagnosis. And so they're two very separate things. And so I think it's important that clinicians at all levels know how to explain that to parents and families too.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay. So for testing psychologists who might be listening to this, Can you speak a little bit more to the barriers that people have faced? I know you touched on that a little bit, but are there other barriers that you see that can help them understand like why we are helping people do this?
Yeah, yeah. So again, the wait lists. And the wait lists are incredibly long. They are on average, where there is a wait list, 6 to 8 months, and that's the average. So that means some places are more. At places that offer a large number of evaluations, so they're pumping out a lot of evaluations, so they have a lot of evaluators, such as university medical centers or large practices. The experience can be a bit brief too. It's a matter of getting you in, running you through the process. It's a very modeled procedural process. So it meets the need to get a diagnosis if you need that. But in addition to the wait list, there are folks who are wondering, what exactly does this mean for me? I want this to be a guided journey and not so clinical, right? And so that's in addition to the wait list, the other areas, later teens and adults who want this to be a process of discovery. And so that's actually how I present assessment to clinicians who are starting to burn out a little bit through traditional therapy or who want to diversify their income in their practice. If your heart is truly in this, assessment is a wonderful way to deeply connect with an individual. You're like a guide, a Sherpa on a journey of self-discovery for a short amount of time. There's the intake, there's the assessment, appointment, one or two of them, there's the feedback, and you don't just send them out into the world, you provide them trusted referrals who will then take over based on the information you receive from assessment. And that can be wonderfully supportive to the individual seeking the assessment, as well as to the clinician who needs a change of pace, wants to deeply engage with an individual, but needs a break from ongoing weekly drawn out therapy. This is a short burst. And so people really enjoy that and find themselves again as a clinician when they do that oftentimes.
Yeah. Okay. So that makes me think that can you specify a little bit more about you are doing assessments on other people's clients or people that have come to you that then you're going to refer out to therapy. You're not typically doing an assessment on your own client and continuing therapy. Is that correct?
So there are different models. There is the traditional model where someone comes to you, they're seeking an evaluation, they were referred or they find out about you. You do the process, and then you have your pages of recommendations based on what the findings of assessment were, and then you send them out. And sometimes, especially with neurodivergence, those referrals are for things that you, even as a trained clinician, wouldn't do. So I might send someone for speech, services by an SLP, or OT, occupational therapy, or sensory processing, or marriage therapy with someone who specializes in one of the partners being neurodivergent, career exploration, services such as vocational rehabilitation. The list goes on and on. And so those wouldn't be things that the individual would do anyway. Then there's a different model, and it kind of is a rebellious model where, and it's a little rebellious, and that is, whereas the old guard would say, to prevent bias, you come in, you do this assessment thing, and then you send people on their way. There's something to be said for more of a collaborative, constructivist approach to assessment. And that means getting to know the person. So there's, trust, deep rapport, the ability to open up, the ability to know a history that you would not get in a 1 hour intake. And so you perform this therapeutic assessment over the process of months. And so over the process of a number of weeks, you get to know the person a little differently through assessment, formal standardized assessment. You, at the end of it, say, so this is what we discovered together. Again, not typed down, resonate with you. And then they come back and give you feedback. And then the next session, do the same thing. So based on the last time we met and completed an assessment, I was thinking we should investigate this area a little further. You open to that? Sure, because there's trust and rapport. Same thing. This is what this assessment shows. I'm thinking that ties into that one incident you told me about when you were a child or when you were in college. I think it explains such and such. What are your thoughts on that? So see how that's a different kind of approach?
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah. And so there's actually a formal model out there called therapeutic assessment. It's really more popular in international circles, but there is a group who participates in the US. And then there are some other models similar to that, whereas it's the understanding that bias happens. Bias is negative. Acknowledge it, and we pretend like it's not there. But when we incorporate it and we complete bias checks with the individual to make sure we're seeing the same thing they are, or are we interpreting things correctly, but still through our professional lens, it becomes therapeutic. So there are some options out there for those who want to continue working with the individual.
I love that. And I reflect back on, so two of my three children are 2E, and doing the testing that is hours and hours over multiple days. She's retired now, but we had a wonderful educational psychologist who would do the psychoed testing, and just the exhaustion that the children get or the person being tested gets. I think that on some level has to impact the results that they're getting and the nervousness, and being able to spread that out over time and really getting to know the person seems to me like it would be advantageous for the results of the assessment as well as the experience of the person being tested.
Absolutely. We have to ask, what is the purpose behind the assessment? If the purpose is to really see what the person can truly do, especially when we think about direct assessments, standardized assessments that are performance-based, we want the person to be rested and comfortable and feel safe. No one will perform their best if they're not, if they're nervous, or if they're feeling rushed, because some of it's timed, right? If we're looking to see if someone fatigues, or to demonstrate that based on formal assessment, we need to recommend these recommendations of accommodations, modifications, schedule at college or school, then that's a different question. And so we do want them to perform as if they were in a standard clinical setting. And it's possible to break these appointments up so that, let's say, the purpose is self-discovery, but also I might need accommodations, to have several appointments, where one is this very formal appointment to get those accommodations. And then you have one or more of the therapeutic. Let's learn a little bit more about your experience and your background. So flexibility is key, so you meet the individual's needs.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, yeah. I mean, people come in all different flavors. We are very complex humans. And so, we have to always account for that with anyone that we're working with.
Absolutely. It's part of the fun.
Absolutely. I agree. Okay. So I think I know the answer to this. However, I'm going to ask the question. Do you find that clients are more or less intimidated working with a master's level clinician versus a psychologist, or do they even know the difference? Does it impact that in any ways for the average person seeking assessment?
So we haven't collected a lot of formal data on this within Mindful You with our data scientists. But what I can say is it's generally parents of children. Usually it's a first-time evaluation, not a reevaluation, where they're asking for a neuropsychologist. Neuropsychology is a specialization, although there is not a particular hoop you have to jump through in most states to call yourself that. But that neuropsychology, quite honestly, is over the top. It's overkill for a neurodevelopmental evaluation. But somewhere along the line, people hear that. And so you don't need a neuropsychologist to conduct a neurodevelopmental evaluation. So that's the one area that I think people feel like they'll get the most from. And it may or may not necessarily be the case. After that, most folks don't know the difference. They want word of mouth. So social referral, that's somebody is positive, warm, lets them be who they truly are, will take this at a pace that is comfortable to them, and who will provide the needed environmental supports to complete the assessment. Now, we can't provide accommodations during an assessment because that would invalidate the instruments, but there's something to be said for providing lighting, sound, no sound, temperature, types of breaks that folks need, smell, no smell, all of those things that we, for some reason, don't consider, but it's hugely important. And for people to be able to bring a comfort item to engage with during breaks, those are really small touches that can lead you to grow your business, because word of mouth out there says you're that type of clinician, and people don't know whether you have a master's or whether you have a doctorate. They just heard from someone that you are the person to go to. You get it.
Right. Yeah. And with the therapists that I work with in my membership, we talk about like website copy in your Psychology Today profile, and that, what you're writing to is the person's problem and how you're going to help them. Like, you can list all the credentials and all the treatment modalities that you use. Most people have heard about CBT, and they might be requesting that specifically just because it's more known, but there's lots of effective things out there. And so we can educate people about, okay, you're looking for this specifically. Let's talk about what your needs are. And, but they don't even ask that question a lot of the times in my experience.
No, they don't. And it's really about the environment, the recommendation. That social referral is so valuable. And that's something that I really push in these programs is start building your network. And it should be bi-directional. People will refer to you, but you refer to others too, because practicing within your scope of competence is so important. And that's something we teach as well. If this is something that you can discover with someone, great. If this doesn't seem like it's in your wheelhouse, no harm done. We refer them to someone else, but at least make that experience positive, regardless of whatever your degree level is.
Okay. So if these reports we already discussed for the schools, but for maybe the pediatrician or some other provider type, are you finding that there's more pushback if it's provided by the assessment is provided by a master's level clinician versus a psychologist? Is that an area where people will get pushback as well?
I think sometimes there's that idea, but what it is and what I hear about is once they see that it's an actual respectable report, and that's so important to me. When I say respectable, I mean it's done well and it's thorough. It's what you would expect from a well-trained testing psychologist. So that's what I want. I provide templates, I provide coaching, feedback, guidance, examples, language even. And I really push that we're not going to cut back on this. You may have assessments that as a therapist you are comfortable using, maybe use one, two at the very max, but we need to use formal standardized measures. And so as long as it's an actual report that you would expect from someone trained as a testing psychologist, then the recipient is quite impressed. And that's the feedback that we get when we collect data, is that people are so impressed with how informative and easy to read, reader-friendly these reports are that we promote.
Mm-hmm.
They're not written
So
for psychologists, they're written for the user.
Okay. So the proof is in the pudding, basically, that you show up, do a good job. They're going to have less. Well, and most of them probably won't even see who did it till they get to the very end of the report. By then, you've sort of shown them like, this is valid. I am trained to do this.
Yeah, absolutely.
So just kind of as a final question, do you have any thoughts about where this is heading in the future? Do you see the master's programs, the psychologist programs, the field in general embracing this and moving forward? Or do you think we're still at a place where there's going to be that pushback that we see currently?
So there are a number of states that provide licensure for a master's level psychologist. So that tells you something right there.
Mm-hmm.
There are a number of states that not only allow, like we said, the majority allow assessment and diagnosis, but that are clearly pushing for master's level folks to be able to assess like this. I forgot which state it is on the East Coast, but I read recently that this state, if it was Maine, somewhere near there, where they're pushing for LCSWs to become autism evaluators to deal with the backload that just isn't being managed well, and the public is suffering because of it. Furthermore, there's talk recently, some information that's been released, that the APA, who is like gatekeeping, it has thrown the doctoral level testing psychologists for a loop with their release of information that they are considering creating a master's level expectation program credential of sorts to be a psychologist and to be able to perform certain level of assessment at the master's level.
Mm-hmm.
In other countries outside of the U.S., psychologists are at the master's level. The U.S. has a unique model of education, I think mainly because we require so much liberal arts in the undergraduate program that we've pushed education further and further. And at this point, getting a postdoc is almost the expectation. The doctoral degree itself is not enough. So I'm hoping that maybe it's a correction that meets the public need.
Right. And for people who are listening that might not be aware of this, most clinicians come out of either whatever level of training that they get with hundreds of $1,000s in school debt. And so the ability to get everyone to go through pursuing higher education, it's just not realistic for a lot of people, especially if you are being paid by insurance companies and the rates are low. There's so many factors that prevent people that may be curious about seeking that out or pursuing that just simply will never be able to. But with the correct training, are able to provide this.
Yes, with the correct training. And that, again, that's part of our mission is to know more and do better, regardless of degree level. But yeah, to not have to make that commitment to sacrifice your family or your practice that's already rolling and working for you. Why put that on pause when you can learn this thoroughly and with support at a much less cost? And I think a much more connected environment. You're connecting with other licensed clinicians in these programs, especially if you're in the 6-month program or in-person ADHD. You leave with names and email and numbers for other people. You have a network that you can ask questions to or connect with, cross-refer. It's a bit more supportive and less competitive than the doctoral program can be.
Yeah, and when we're looking at accessibility, all of those things are important. The more people you have doing this, the wider range of price points for people who need this, people who maybe have grants or funding that can help cover this to keep the cost low for people. There's so many opportunities that can come up when you have more people providing the service.
Absolutely. We just had someone who signed on who got a contract with a regional center to do autism testing with a master's. And because the region of their state is so desperately in need, they came to me and said, I don't know how to do this. I was awarded the grant or the contract. Help me learn. And so they're meeting a need. This huge area of their state is saying, yes, come in with your master's degree. We need you to do this. Just trusting that the person knew how to do it. And luckily, they were very ethical and said, I need to be trained. But yes, this absolutely is needed. We need to widen who can do this and more people who can afford it because it's at all levels. I think when you are doing well in your practice, I know that was my experience, you want to give back and you're able financially to offer these scholarship assessments for those who would never otherwise get a really high touch supportive evaluation.
Mm-hmm. And that benefits everybody.
Yep.
Okay. So can you tell me if you have a favorite catchphrase or analogy that you like to use?
Yeah. So I shared one already where I said, when you're doing assessment, you're a guide or a Sherpa of sorts, and you're helping someone on an expedition or exploration of who they are, discovery of where they want to go, and a navigator to help them get there. And I think that is one of the best metaphors that describes assessment process when we're doing it from the correct framework, right? We're doing it to really support people, not with a specific end in mind or a particular diagnosis in mind. It's understanding who you are, and I'll guide you there with the goal of designing a life of right fit, living, loving, learning, working. That's a right fit for you.
Yeah, I like that. I always find that people who work in our field always have that catchphrase or analogy in their back pocket that they pull out with their population. And I just love the idea of, looking at this as a journey. Like so much of what we do in our field, it's a journey.
It is. Yep. Absolutely.
Well, Darlene, thank you so much for joining me today. I will be putting in the show notes the information, but your website is Mindful You with the letter U, not YOU. And then you're going to also be having some other social media places where people can find you.
So, yes.
Okay, great. So I will put that information in the show notes. I appreciate you taking the time. I learned a lot today. I hope this opens people's eyes to the possibilities that are there. And any final things you want to share before we finish?
Yeah, I would encourage everyone to check out the website at mindfulu.net and look at the offerings there. We are offering a number of things right now that match people's financial abilities, time abilities, and to follow us into the new year, because we're actually offering training on beyond executive function, helping people with memory and learning didactically instead of just an EF coach type of skill. And I'm hoping that that's a way to help people improve quality of life rather than accommodate a life that they're struggling in. And so we want to support therapists with that. And for anyone who's just curious about what we do and how we do it, I'd love for them to email us.
Right. That's wonderful. And most people don't realize that people offering these types of programs, we want you to email us. We want you to ask the questions, we want to support you and we want to make sure it's the right fit. I mean, referred people who come to my membership to other groups sometimes. I'm like, yeah, this is really a better fit for you. And so making sure that it's good for everybody.
Absolutely. And we have a lot of colleagues that offer different types of trainings or programs. And if it's not the right fit, we know someone who might be a better fit for you.
That's wonderful. Okay. So for all the hardworking therapists out there, please remember our work is hard, but it doesn't have to be lonely.